Welcome, dear viewers. For more exclusive, thrilling stories every week, subscribe to our channel. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. I used to work the night shift at a long-term care home just outside of Pittsburgh. Not glamorous, I know, but it paid better than I expected, and I got used to the strange hours. Nights were quieter. Most of the residents were asleep by 9, and by 11 it was just me, a skeleton crew of nurses, and the low hum of machines whispering through the halls. The building was old, converted from a Catholic boarding school in the late 50s. You could still see the bones of what it used to be: high arch ceilings, wooden doors with brass numbers, an old chapel on the 3rd floor that had been locked since I started. It was December when it started. The decorations had gone up the week after Thanksgiving. Cheap paper snowflakes, artificial wreaths, and a sad little tree with flickering lights that barely worked. There was a kind of weariness in the air, even more than usual. Most of the residents didn't have families anymore. Some had outlived their children, others just never got visitors. But none of them ever complained, except for one. Her name was Mrs. Brenner, 94 years old, sharp as a tack, but completely blind. She was usually quiet, liked to sit by her window and listen to the radio, always tuned to some old German station. She didn't speak much English, mostly muttered to herself in a dialect I couldn't place. The nurses kept her room dim because she said bright lights gave her the crawling feelings. No one pushed back. She'd lived through too much to argue with. But on the night of December 5th, something changed. I was making rounds when I passed her room and heard her speaking, clearly in English. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but distinct. "He is coming," she said. I knocked gently, then let myself in. She was sitting upright in bed, her hands clutched over the blanket like she was bracing for something. "Mrs. Brenner, you okay?" She didn't answer at first. Her lips were moving, but I couldn't hear what she was saying. Then as I stepped closer, she turned her head slightly, like she sensed me. "You must mark the doors," she said, "with ash, before midnight." I froze. "Excuse me?" She reached out blindly, grabbing my wrist with a surprising grip. "He comes for the ones who forget, the ones who pretend he isn't real." Her eyes were glassy, pale, but there was something behind them. A memory she wasn't just reliving, but waiting for. "Do you know what night it is?" she asked. I did. It was the night of December 5th. She answered for me anyway. Krampusnacht. Then she began to pray, in German. Rapid, panicked, like she was trying to finish before something arrived. I left the room, told the nurse on duty she was confused and upset, and made a note in her chart. She didn't sleep that night, just sat up, whispering. We gave her a sedative around 3 a.m., but it barely touched her. The next morning she was silent. Didn't eat, didn't speak, just faced the window, hands folded. I almost forgot about it until one of the newer staff, Danny, told me he saw something weird on the cameras. "Check the hallway outside 302, he said. That was Mrs. Brenner's room. I pulled up the footage from the night before, sped through the hours, and then, around 12:16 a.m., the hallway lights flickered, just once. And there, for a brief few frames, was a figure, tall, cloaked, walking slowly past her room. And I swear to God, there were hooves where its feet should have been. I paused, rewound, zoomed. There was no face, just a long, horned silhouette. We both sat there in silence. "Could be a glitch," I offered weakly. Danny didn't reply. That night, I checked on Mrs. Brenner again. She didn't respond. Her radio was off. The curtains were drawn. But on her nightstand, she'd left something. A small, hand-carved figurine. Wooden. Painted in faded red and black. It looked like a goat or a devil, its mouth open wide. In one hand it held a switch, in the other, a burlap sack. I asked the nurse if anyone had given it to her. No one had. She said Mrs. Brenner hadn't spoken to anyone all day. We locked it in the office, a little unnerved, but mostly just confused. That was when the scratching started. It was faint at first, coming from the walls behind her room. Maintenance was called in to check for rats, but they found nothing. On December 6th, Mrs. Brenner disappeared. Not died, not transferred, just gone. Her bed was empty. The sheets were untouched, the window still closed. No one had seen her leave. No camera footage, no visitor log. It was like she had vanished. We filed a report. The police came. Interviews were done. They found no signs of forced entry, no trace of her anywhere on the property. Just the figurine, still locked in the office, still sitting on the shelf. That night, I dreamed of her voice. Mark the doors, mark the doors. When I woke up, there was soot on my windowsill, and outside, in the fresh December snow, were hoof prints. Just one set, leading up to the building. Not away. I didn't sleep the next night. Couldn't. Not after what I saw in the snow. Hoof prints. Just one set. No human steps nearby, no tire tracks. Just deep, sunken prints that started near the tree line behind the east wing and ended directly beneath the third-floor windows, right under Mrs. Brenner's old room. I showed the security team. They said it was probably a prank, a staff member messing around. Someone suggested a deer, but even I knew deer don't walk upright in a straight line, not with prints that large, not with that kind of intention. I didn't even tell them about the soot on my window. The weirdness didn't stop there. The following week, strange things kept happening on the night shift. Lights flickering in hallways that had recently been rewired, cold spots in rooms with working heaters, and the smell. Burnt cinnamon and something sour that would hit you in certain spots and vanish just as fast. One of the aides, Tori, swore she heard children laughing in the long hallway near the chapel. But we don't house any pediatric patients. There are no kids in that place, not even for visits. I would have chalked it up to stress, seasonal depression, overworked staff, grief around the holidays. But then room 311 started acting up. The patient there, Mr. Harlan, had late-stage Parkinson's. Barely spoke, but one night, just after midnight, he began screaming. Not words, just panicked, terrified howling. When we ran in, we found him staring into the corner of the room, pointing. We looked, nothing was there, just shadow. But when I tried to calm him down, he grabbed my sleeve and whispered 2 words, clear as day. The sack. Then he began crying like a child, shaking. I looked around the room. On the nightstand, next to his untouched dinner tray, was a small tuft of coarse, dark hair. I bagged it, sent it to maintenance. They tossed it out. The next morning, Mr. Harlan had no memory of the night before, couldn't speak again. And somehow, the figurine, the one Mrs. Brenner left, was missing from the locked office. I checked the log. No one had opened that cabinet. No sign of forced entry. But the glass was smeared, like it had been opened from the inside. I started doing research about Krampus, more than the kitschy stuff. Bells, horns, chains. I went deeper. Turns out, some traditions say he doesn't just punish the wicked, he punishes the forgotten. The ones who let the past rot quietly, especially those who turn their back on their own guilt or on the stories they swore never to speak again. There were accounts, fragments online, untrustworthy letters, old blog posts, from survivors of WIR villages in Austria and Germany who claimed Krampus came not once, but again later in life, 50, 60 years after they'd first seen him as children. They were marked, and if they weren't taken back then, he waited. He's patient, they said, but he never forgets. December 13th, just 8 days after Mrs. Brenner disappeared. We had a massive power outage. The backup generators kicked in, but they didn't reach the 3rd floor. And that night, room 308 went cold. The patient there, Miss Carter, was found slumped in her chair, Not dead, but catatonic, no signs of injury, just frozen in place, eyes wide open, her mouth slightly agape. Her lips were burned, like she'd been shushed with a branding iron. On the wall above her bed, someone, or something, had drawn a crooked, jagged symbol in black soot. It wasn't charcoal, it wasn't from a fire. The cleaning staff wouldn't go near it. One of them quit that night. I took a picture on my phone, but when I checked later, the image was corrupted, just static, as if whatever was marked on that wall didn't want to be recorded. By now, the staff were whispering. They knew something was wrong. Most didn't say it outright, but you could feel it. The way they avoided the chapel wing, the way everyone checked the doors twice, 3 times. No one wanted to be there past midnight. I asked the director if we could perform some kind of cleansing, a priest, even a cultural tradition, something non-denominational. She laughed it off, said we treat bodies, not souls. But I remembered what Mrs. Brenner had said about marking the doors with ash. So that night, I made my own. Burnt a bowl of sage from the nurse's lounge stash, took the ashes and, when no one was looking, smeared them over the door frames of the 3rd floor hallway. I felt stupid until I got to room 302, Mrs. Brenner's old room. The door was open. I hadn't touched it. No one had used that room since she vanished. It had been locked, unassigned. I stepped in, and sitting on the bed, as if waiting, was the figurine. Krampus, red and black, holding his sack. This time, there was something inside the sack, a tiny rolled-up scrap of yellowed paper. I unrolled it. In shaking hands, I read, "I tried to warn you. He never comes just once." Suddenly the room was cold, not just chilly, deathly. My breath fogged, the lights flickered overhead. Then I heard it, hoofsteps, heavy, deliberate, coming down the hall outside. I backed away from the door. A shadow passed the frosted window slit. Horns, a hunched silhouette, chains dragging softly behind. It paused, sniffed the air, and moved on. The footsteps faded. I stood there for what felt like an hour before I stepped out again. The soot on the doors was smudged, but still visible. That was 2 years ago. The nursing home is still open. Most of the staff from back then are gone. Burnout, transfers, a few just stopped showing up. The director had a heart attack last year, died in her sleep. The figurine, I buried it, far out in the woods in a locked box under 6 inches of salt. But sometimes, when it snows, I still see prints near my apartment building. Just one set, deep, cloven. I keep ash above every door now. Every December 5th, I light candles and don't look outside after midnight. Because I believe Mrs. Brenner was right. Krampus isn't just for the bad kids. He's for the forgotten ones. The ones who carry guilt, pretend not to remember. The ones who thought they escaped justice. But he remembers, and he comes again, eventually. When I was 9, I thought Krampus was just some old European fairy tale, something my Oma would bring up every December to scare me into behaving. She grew up in a small village nestled somewhere in the Austrian Alps, and every winter she'd go on about the half-god, half-demon that punished bad children. It was always the same tone, half serious, half smirking, like she wasn't entirely sure she believed it herself. But now I'm older, 32, and there are things I've seen, things I can't explain. I don't tell people this story anymore because they look at me like I've lost something. But that Christmas, back in 2001, I lost more than my belief in fairy tales. I lost the safety of silence. It started when we visited Oma's house in upstate Vermont. She'd moved there after Opa died, claiming it reminded her of Austria. Her place sat just outside a dense stretch of forest, and even though it looked quaint in the daytime, stone chimney, gingerbread trim, the scent of wood smoke curling through the eaves, at night, it changed. The shadows pressed up close to the windows. The trees didn't move with the wind. They stood still, watching. It snowed the whole day we arrived, thick, soft flakes. By evening, the world had turned blue-gray and still. My parents unpacked while I wandered through the narrow upstairs hallway, dragging my fingers along the faded wallpaper. I didn't like how quiet it was, the kind of quiet that makes you hold your breath. There was one door I wasn't supposed to open, the attic. It wasn't locked, but Uma told me, sternly, not to go up there. "You hear anything from up there," she said, her German accent curling around her words. "You do not go looking, you let it be." I asked her why, and she only looked out the window, eyes fixed on the dark trees beyond. "December is his season," she muttered. "Especially tonight. Krampusnacht." That night, I couldn't sleep. My room was small and cold, the walls thin enough to hear the wind, or what I thought was the wind. At first, it was just creaking, normal old house noises. But around 1 a.m., I started hearing something different. A dragging sound, slow and heavy, like someone was pulling a length of chain across wooden boards. It came from above me, the attic. I pulled the covers over my head, heart pounding, told myself it was nothing, maybe snow sliding off the roof. But the sound came again, louder, accompanied by a low grunt, almost like a cough or a growl. I couldn't move. Every instinct screamed at me to stay in bed, and I did until I heard the attic's stairs creak. One by one, someone or something was coming down. I wanted to scream for my parents, but my voice caught in my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut. Then, nothing. No more steps, no creaking, just silence. Until… tap, tap. I opened my eyes and saw the doorknob turn. Slowly, then stop. I didn't sleep again that night, just waited until sunlight crept in through the frosted window, warming my face. When I finally got the courage to open the bedroom door, the hallway was empty. The air was still. At breakfast, Oma was pale. She kept glancing at the ceiling. My mom and dad didn't seem to notice anything strange. I tried to tell them what happened, but my mom just smiled and said I had a vivid imagination. That afternoon, I asked Oma again what was in the attic. She looked tired, scared even. "There are things that come with the snow," she said, "things that follow bloodlines. I thought I left him behind when I left Austria, but he finds his way. He always finds his way." That night, I couldn't help myself. I had to know. I waited until everyone went to bed. I crept into the hallway, barefoot on creaking floorboards, and stared at the attic door. I held my breath and turned the knob. It opened with a slow groan. Inside, everything was dust and shadows. Old trunks, furniture draped in sheets, cobwebs like gauze in the corners. It smelled of old cedar and something acrid, like iron left out in the snow. I should have turned back, but I heard something. A faint jingle, like a bell, and before I could stop myself, I stepped inside. There were footprints in the dust, hoofprints, large and deep, spiraling toward the back corner of the attic where the ceiling sloped low. And then I saw the chains, heavy, rusted, trailing across the floor into the darkness. And something else, black fur, and breathing, ragged, wet, hungry. I didn't scream. Not because I was brave, but because I couldn't. It was like the cold had reached inside me and frozen the sound before it left my throat. I backed away slowly, my eyes locked on the corner where the chains led. The black fur shifted just slightly, like whatever was crouched there had just tensed, preparing to lunge. But it didn't. It stayed still, breathing. That wet, ragged breathing filled the attic like fog. I could see my breath in front of me, but I swear I saw his too. Massive plumes of mist rising and falling from the dark. Then I heard it, a whisper, not from the thing in the attic, but from behind me. "Don't look at it, Oma." She was standing at the attic door in her nightgown, holding a candle that flickered wildly against the draft. Her voice was steady, but her face looked older than I'd ever seen it, like something had aged her in a single night. "Get out of there, now." I didn't hesitate. I stumbled out of the attic and nearly tripped on the top step. Oma caught my arm. Her grip was like iron. She slammed the door and muttered something under her breath. A prayer, I think, in German. Then she turned to me and said something I'd never forgotten. "He saw you." That night, Oma sat by my bed. She didn't explain everything, but she told me a few things, enough to understand what kind of danger I was in. "Krampus doesn't come for naughty children," she said softly. "Not really. That part is for the stories. The truth is, he comes for the marked ones. Families that made pacts. Old blood debts. And some children are born into it, like being born into a curse." I asked her what kind of pact. She wouldn't answer, just said, "It wasn't me. It was your great-grossvater. I thought the blood had thinned, but..." She looked at me and her voice caught. "You've seen him. That means he knows where you are now." The rest of the visit passed without incident, but I felt watched the whole time. The attic stayed locked. No more dragging chains, no more hoof prints, but I never stopped feeling it. Him, just beyond the boards and dust. Years passed. I tried to convince myself it was a dream, a childhood hallucination fed by creepy old folk tales. You'd be surprised how easy it is to bury something like that when you grow up. You stop believing in monsters. But monsters don't stop believing in you. I was 24 when Oma died. Winter again. She passed peacefully in her sleep, or so they said. But when I flew up for the funeral, I noticed something strange. The attic door was nailed shut from the outside, with iron nails. I didn't ask questions. I didn't want answers anymore. We buried her under a grove of evergreens behind the house. Snow had started falling during the service, and by the time the last prayer was spoken, the ground was white. The silence that came with it brought back old memories of hoofprints in dust, a breath that wasn't mine. That night, I stayed alone in the house. No one else wanted to. My parents offered to put me in a hotel, but I said no. I don't know why. Maybe part of me wanted closure. Or maybe I thought I'd already survived it once. I shouldn't have stayed. Around midnight, I heard the creaking again. Not from the attic, but from the walls themselves, like something massive was crawling through them, dragging weight behind it. Then the bells. Soft at first, almost delicate, then louder and closer. I stood in the hallway, just like I had all those years ago, staring at the attic door. The nails were gone. The door hung slightly ajar, the way it had when I opened it as a child. The cold rolled out like a living thing. And then, he stepped out. He was taller than I remembered. 8, maybe 9 feet. His horns scraping the ceiling. His face was a cruel mix of goat and man, and his eyes were a sick, gleaming yellow. His beard was matted, tangled with what looked like bones, and his tongue slithered between blackened teeth. Chains hung from his arms and shoulders, dragging behind him like some kind of cursed tail. In his left hand he held a bundle of birch rods, withered, stained dark. In the other, he held a sack, a burlap sack, and it moved. He didn't speak, he just stared. Then slowly he tilted his head and grinned. My legs wouldn't move. I was frozen, not just with fear, but with some ancient recognition. Like he'd always known me, and I'd always belonged to him. Then he turned and left. Just walked down the stairs, his chains clinking with every step. I followed, trembling. The front door was wide open. He stepped into the snow and disappeared into the woods behind Oma's house, the sack slung over his back. It still moved. I don't know who or what was in that sack, and I never want to. I only know that when I looked down at my own arms, they were covered in soot, like someone had touched me with burning hands. After that night, I left and never returned. We sold the house, but I made sure to have the attic sealed first, with iron nails Every December since, I've heard bells outside my apartment window. Just once, faint. And every year, I find black soot on my doorstep. I never see footprints. But the chains? Sometimes, in the deep hours of the night, I hear them, dragging slowly across my ceiling. Have you ever heard chains in the attic? Because if you have, he might be watching you, too. When I was 12, my grandfather gave me a snow globe for Christmas. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple glass dome with a tiny alpine village inside, a chapel, some evergreens, and a lone figure standing in the snow near a cabin. He didn't wrap it, just handed it to me with that crooked little grin of his and said, "Keep this somewhere safe, and don't shake it unless you need to." I laughed, of course. I thought he was joking. I mean, what could a snow globe do? But he just looked at me and said, "It's not for you, it's for him." That was the last time I saw him. He died 2 weeks later. Heart attack, they said, in his sleep. I kept the globe though. Even when I got older and moved out, I took it with me, tucked it onto a bookshelf between old paperbacks and souvenirs I never really looked at, and for a while, I forgot all about it. Until last December. I was living alone in a cabin I had rented up in the Swiss Alps, trying to finish my manuscript. It was one of those remote places with no neighbors for miles and only one road in or out. I figured the isolation would help me focus. But then it started snowing. And didn't stop. By the third day, the power went out. By the fifth, the road was completely buried. And by the sixth, I wasn't alone. It started with noises at night, not the creaks and groans of a shifting cabin, but something heavier, like footsteps crunching slowly through the snow around the house. Measured, intentional. I tried to brush it off, told myself it was just the wind or maybe an animal, but I knew better. You can feel when something is watching. On the seventh night, I woke to find the front door wide open. Snow drifted in across the floor, and in the middle of it, there was a single set of hoof prints. Not boots, not paws. Hoofs, and they didn't go out, only in. I searched the house top to bottom, heart pounding, but I didn't find anything. No intruder, no signs of forced entry. But when I finally made it back to the living room, I noticed something strange. The snow globe, my grandfather's globe, was sitting in the middle of the table, and it was shaking. I hadn't touched it. The snow inside swirled in a slow, mesmerizing dance, and something about the figure inside looked different. It was taller. Before, it had looked like a villager, bundled up in a cloak. Now, it had horns. I leaned in, trying to make sense of it, and that's when it moved. Just a little, a twitch, like a tiny puppet in the glass, its head turned slightly, as if looking right at me. I nearly dropped the thing. I put it back on the shelf, tried to convince myself I was imagining things. Sleep deprived, cabin fever, maybe even grief catching up with me after all these years. But the next night, I heard laughter. Not outside, not muffled by wind or walls. Inside the cabin, low, breathless, cruel. I didn't sleep that night, just sat up in the kitchen with a fire poker in one hand and the snow globe in the other. The figure inside didn't move again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was waiting, watching. And when morning came, I found something scratched into the frost on the window beside my bed. It wasn't in English, but I remembered the shape of the letters, German. I sent a photo to a friend who studied folklore at university. His reply came 2 hours later. That's a warning. It says, "You have seen him. You are known." After I read that message, "You have seen him. You are known," something inside me changed. I wasn't just afraid anymore. I felt marked. I left the frost untouched on the window, like I was afraid disturbing it would make things worse. I didn't know the rules anymore. I didn't know if there were any. All I knew was that the figure in the snow globe was still turned ever so slightly, head tilted toward the glass, like it had locked eyes with me through a layer of fake snow and trapped time. That day, I tried to hike out, The road was gone, not just snowed over, gone, like the landscape itself had changed. The pine trees had shifted closer together. The trail I'd used to get in no longer made sense. I walked in one direction for 3 hours. When I finally stopped to check my phone's GPS, it showed me back at the cabin. Same coordinates, the same porch, the same single set of hoof prints, now joined by something worse. Claw marks, deep ones, across the wood. I stayed inside the rest of the day, boarding up the windows with whatever furniture I could move. The globe stayed in the center of the table, untouched, but I could swear it was colder near it, like it gave off a chill that didn't belong in this world. That night, I lit every candle I had. My laptop battery was dead. My phone was nearly there too. There was no signal, hadn't been since day 4. The wind howled. Then the scratching began. Not on the windows, from inside the walls, like something was trying to crawl through the insulation, one jagged finger at a time. And just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Silence. Then I heard the whisper. My name, spoken slow, like whoever said it was tasting the sound. I turned. The snow globe was glowing, dimly, from the inside, and the figure? It was gone. I picked up the globe, heart racing, and turned it in my hands. Nothing. Just the tiny chapel, the cabin, the trees. But the space where the horned figure had stood was empty. And the snow, it wasn't white anymore. It was gray, like ash. I threw it into the fireplace. The glass didn't crack. The fire didn't touch it. It just sat there, the flames bending away like they were afraid to get close. I ran to my grandfather's journal. He'd kept a leather-bound notebook full of strange observations, things he never talked about in front of family. I'd never bothered to open it before. But inside, scrawled in his old, sharp handwriting, was something that still makes my blood go cold. The globe must be kept sealed. It contains a fragment of Krampus, his eye. If it turns, he sees. If he sees, he chooses. On the last page, dated just weeks before he gave it to me, he'd written, "It's following me now. I can't run anymore. It's time to pass the burden." He knew. He gave it to me on purpose. I stayed awake all night again, but sometime around 4 a.m., I must have dozed off, because I woke to the sound of hoofs on the roof. Not footsteps, not scratches. Hooves, slow, measured, like it was circling. And then the whisper returned, closer this time, right behind my ear. "You are known." I didn't turn around. I couldn't. In the morning, I found the snow globe on my pillow, back in its original state. The figure had returned to the center, but it was closer to the glass now, watching. I left that cabin the moment the snowplow came through. I tried to throw the globe away, burn it, bury it. Nothing worked. It always comes back. Sometimes it's in the mailbox. Sometimes it's inside my dresser drawer. One time, it was in my car. Last Christmas, I tried mailing it to a folklore museum in Munich with no return address. It arrived at my doorstep 3 days later, wrapped in black paper, tied with twine. No note, just a faint smell of sulfur. I don't know what it wants. Maybe nothing. Maybe it just enjoys watching, but if you ever come across an old globe with a horned figure inside, don't shake it. Don't turn your back on it, and whatever you do, don't let it see you. I grew up in a part of Austria that doesn't show up on postcards. No ski resorts, no gift shops, just steep valleys, sagging barns, and little villages tucked into the trees like they're trying to stay hidden. We had traditions, old ones, things that never made it to the city. Every December, the men in town would dress as Krampus and stomp through the village, scaring children and throwing ash. It was a game, mostly, a loud, drunken one. But there was something else too. Something they didn't talk about when tourists came through. Something they only whispered about when the snow got deep and the nights grew too quiet. They called it Die Dunkelheiten, the dark keeping. Every few years, something strange would happen. Usually around the 5th or 6th of December. Kids would start having the same dream. They'd wake up screaming. Some wouldn't speak for days. And then one would go missing. Always just one. Never any signs of a break-in, no footprints, no struggle. The kid would just be gone. And every time, the adults would blame it on wolves, or bears, or the weather. But we all knew. We knew. I was 9 when it happened to us. It was my cousin, Tomas. Lived 2 houses down, just past the blacksmith's old shed. He was 10, and we were close. Spent every weekend poking around the woods, daring each other to climb the old stone walls or sneak into the shuttered barn behind the church. He was the first to start having the dreams. He told me one day after school, face pale, eyes dull like he hadn't slept in days. "I see them in the barn," he whispered. "They're waiting." I asked him, "Who?" "The children. They sit in the hay and hum, and someone else is with them, something tall, with chains." At first I thought he was just trying to scare me. Tomas was always one for ghost stories. But then other kids started saying the same thing. The dreams, the barn, the humming. And then Tomas disappeared, vanished from his bed on the night of December 5th. Windows still locked, no tracks in the snow, just an open closet door. The village reacted like it always did. Search parties, posters, quiet tears behind closed shutters. But the adults knew he wouldn't be found. They never went near that barn. So of course I did. I couldn't let it go. Couldn't let him go. He was my best friend. My cousin. The night after he disappeared, I slipped out. Wrapped in layers, flashlight in hand, I crept through the snow toward the church's old barn. It had been locked for years. Rough, sagging, door chained shut. But as I approached, I realized something was wrong. The chain was broken. The door was opened. I should have turned back. I should have run home and pretended none of it was real. But I stepped inside. It was cold, colder than outside, the kind of cold that sits in your bones and won't leave. My breath clouded in the air, and the flashlight flickered with every step. The barn was empty at first glance, just old hay, broken tools, a few rusted lanterns. But then I heard it. The humming. Soft, high-pitched, coming from the far corner. I followed it, and I saw them. 4 children sitting perfectly still in the hay, their backs to me, all humming the same eerie, tuneless melody. Their clothes were thin, out of season, like they'd come from different times. I opened my mouth to speak, and one of them turned. It was Tomas, but his eyes, they weren't right. They were frosted over, like glass, and his smile was too wide, too perfect. He said nothing, just pointed behind me. And that's when I heard the bells. The bells were faint at first, slow and deliberate, a hollow metallic chime that echoed through the rafters of that forgotten barn. I froze. Every instinct in me screamed to run, but I couldn't move. Tomas was still pointing behind me. I turned. There was something standing in the loft. Not a man, not fully. It stood just beyond the reach of my flashlight, tall enough that its horns scraped the rafters. Its shape was wrong, its limbs too long, its back too hunched. I could make out a cloak or robe, heavy and black, with chains dragging from its waist like iron vines. The light flickered again, and when it came back on, it was gone. The children were gone too. No humming, no Tomas. Just me and the cold. It had seeped under my skin. My fingers were stiff, and my breath felt like it was freezing in my lungs. I stumbled backward, dropped my flashlight, and turned to flee. That's when I heard the laugh. It wasn't a human sound, more like a snort crossed with a growl, mocking, guttural. It came from the hayloft. I ran. I didn't stop to look back, didn't pause until I reached my front door. My mother was awake, waiting for me, and when she saw the state I was in, something shifted in her face. She didn't scold me, didn't ask why I had dirt on my hands or blood on my knees. She just wrapped me in a blanket and whispered, "You went near the barn, didn't you?" I nodded. She shut her eyes, and for the first time in my life, I saw her cry. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet stream of tears, like she'd been holding it in for years. That night, she told me the truth. She told me about Die Dunkelheiten, the dark keeping, that every generation or so the village was visited, that Krampus wasn't just a tale to scare naughty children, but something far older, something bound to the land, something we had kept at bay with tradition. The processions, the costumes, the noise, all of it was meant to appease him, to distract him, to keep him from taking more than one. But if you break the rules, she said, if you follow him, he notices. I didn't sleep again that winter, neither did she. Tomas was never found. His parents moved away the following spring, and the barn, it was burned to the ground, quietly, without ceremony. But that didn't end it. Years passed. I moved to the city, thought I had left it behind, until last December, I got a call from my sister. Her daughter, my niece, had started having the dreams, the barn, the humming, the chain. She lives in Vienna, far from the old valley, but it didn't matter. It followed me. That night, my niece disappeared from her room, locked door, sealed windows, gone. And then I knew. I hadn't escaped anything. I had brought it with me. Now, every December, I stay awake all night. I light candles, I keep bells on every door, and I wait. Sometimes, I hear him in the distance, the crunch of hooves in the snow, a faint jingle just beyond the walls, and sometimes, I still hear Tomas humming. So if you ever dream of children sitting in hay or see a figure watching from the rafters, don't go near it. Don't follow the sound, because if you do, he'll know you're listening. That wraps up tonight's pasta. If your lights flicker, don't blame the wiring until the next shadow creeps in. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. It helps more than you know. And if you liked the story, don't forget to hit the like button. In the comments below, share your own horror experience. I'll be reading after midnight. Good night. See you again tomorrow.